No matter how much you try to distract yourself, they keep coming back into your thoughts, and deep down part of you wonders, if the connection feels this strong, why are we still distant? Here's the truth most people never realize. Two people can genuinely care about each other and still remain emotionally stuck. Not because the feelings aren't real, but because fear, timing, insecurity, and emotional habits create distance where love wants closeness. Sometimes the person you can't stop thinking about feels the exact same pull toward you. They think about your messages. They replay your conversations. They wonder if you've moved on. But neither of you knows how to bridge the gap without risking rejection. And that's what makes this kind of connection so painful. One of the hardest truths to accept in relationships is that someone can genuinely care about you and still create distance between you. Most people assume that if feelings are real, the behavior will automatically be clear, consistent, and reassuring. But emotions don't always work that neatly. Human beings are shaped by past experiences, fears, insecurities, and emotional habits that often interfere with the way they express love. This is why someone can seem incredibly connected to you one moment and emotionally unavailable the next. It's confusing because their actions don't fully match the emotional intensity you feel between you. You start questioning everything. You wonder if you imagined the connection, if they lost interest, or if you somehow did something wrong. But often, the distance has far more to do with what's happening inside them than anything you caused. For some people, closeness feels unfamiliar. They may crave intimacy deeply, but when it actually begins to happen, fear takes over. The connection becomes emotionally risky. Suddenly they feel exposed, vulnerable, and uncertain about whether they can maintain the relationship or live up to expectations. Instead of leaning into those feelings, they instinctively pull away to regain emotional control. And this is where many people misunderstand love. They think love should always look confident and direct. But emotionally conflicted people often express affection inconsistently. They may disappear after moments of closeness, avoid difficult conversations, or act distant right when things start becoming meaningful. Not because they feel nothing, but because the feelings are becoming too real for them to comfortably manage. Of course, this doesn't mean you should excuse unhealthy behavior or endlessly wait for someone to figure themselves out. Emotional distance still affects you, regardless of the reason behind it. But understanding the psychology behind it can stop you from automatically translating distance into rejection. Sometimes a person withdraws because they are overwhelmed by how much they feel, not because they feel too little. The stronger the emotional connection becomes, the more it activates fears they thought they had under control. Fear of abandonment, fear of losing independence, fear of getting hurt, fear of not being enough. The tragedy is that two people can care deeply about each other while both feeling emotionally unsafe at the same time. One person becomes anxious and seeks reassurance, while the other becomes overwhelmed and creates space. And without awareness, this cycle keeps pushing both people further apart, even when the feelings underneath remain very real. One of the most painful parts of missing someone is believing you're the only one thinking about the connection. When someone hasn't reached out, hasn't said how they feel, or appears distant on the surface, it's easy to assume they've forgotten about you completely. But people often carry emotions silently. Just because someone isn't expressing what they feel openly does not mean those feelings disappeared. Many people spend far more time thinking about someone than they would ever admit. They replay conversations in their head, revisit memories at random moments, and wonder what the other person is doing. Sometimes it happens late at night when distractions fade away. Sometimes it happens in the middle of an ordinary day when something small suddenly reminds them of you. A phrase, a song, a place, even a certain type of silence can bring all the emotions rushing back. The strange thing about emotional connections is that they leave traces behind. When someone truly affected you, your mind doesn't simply erase them because communication stopped. Real emotional experiences create patterns in the brain. That's why certain people stay with us mentally long after the relationship changed or distance appeared. And the same can happen on their side too. The problem is, people often assume that if someone misses them, they would automatically reach out immediately. But emotions are rarely that simple. Pride gets involved, fear gets involved, ego gets involved. Someone may think about messaging you 10 different times and still never press send because they are afraid of looking vulnerable or being rejected. Sometimes they don't know where they stand with you anymore. They wonder if you've moved on, if you're angry, or if contacting you would only make things worse. So instead of acting on their emotions, they sit with them privately. This creates a frustrating situation where two people can secretly miss each other while both pretending to be emotionally fine. One person waits for reassurance while the other waits for a sign that it's safe to reconnect. Not everyone expresses love loudly or confidently. Some people internalize everything. They carry emotions quietly behind controlled behavior, short messages, or complete silence. And because they don't openly communicate what they feel, others assume there's nothing there. But silence is not always emotional emptiness. Sometimes silence is hesitation. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's someone trying to protect themselves from the possibility of disappointment. The important thing is to avoid building fantasies around what someone might feel while ignoring reality completely. But it's equally important not to assume that a lack of outward expression means the emotional connection meant nothing to them. Some people think about you far more than you realize. They just don't know how to bridge the distance between feeling something deeply and actually saying it out loud. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about relationships is believing that strong chemistry automatically guarantees a successful connection. They assume that if two people feel deeply drawn to each other, everything else should naturally fall into place. But chemistry and emotional readiness are two completely different things. Attraction can happen instantly, while emotional maturity often takes years to develop. This is why two people can share an intense connection and still struggle to create a healthy relationship. The feelings may be real, the bond may feel undeniable, and the emotional pull may be strong, yet one or both people may not actually be prepared for the vulnerability, consistency, and responsibility that love requires. Sometimes someone meets you during a chaotic chapter of their life. They may still be carrying emotional wounds from a previous relationship, dealing with stress they haven't processed, struggling with self-worth, or trying to regain control over parts of themselves that already feel unstable. In those moments, even genuine love can feel overwhelming rather than comforting. A lot of people imagine love as something that arrives and suddenly fixes emotional confusion. But meaningful relationships often do the opposite. They expose unresolved fears. They challenge emotional patterns. They force people to confront parts of themselves they usually avoid. For someone who fears vulnerability, real intimacy can feel terrifying. The closer they get to you, the more they realize how much they could lose. And instead of embracing that closeness, they begin creating distance, because distance feels emotionally safer than risking heartbreak. This is why timing matters so much in relationships. You can meet the right person at the wrong emotional moment, and that reality is painful because feelings alone cannot overcome emotional unavailability. Someone may genuinely care about you, but still lack the capacity to communicate properly, show consistency, or build the stability required for a healthy relationship. It's important to understand this because many people personalize someone's emotional limitations. They think, if I were enough, they would choose me properly. But often, the issue is not about your worth. It's about their emotional ability to handle the depth of the connection. That doesn't mean you should wait indefinitely for someone to become ready. Love should not require abandoning your own emotional needs while hoping someone eventually changes. But understanding emotional readiness helps you stop romanticizing confusion while also avoiding unnecessary self-blame. Some people lose meaningful connections, not because the feelings weren't real, but because they met those feelings before they developed the emotional tools necessary to sustain them. And sometimes the saddest part of love is realizing that two people can deeply want each other while still being emotionally out of sync with what the relationship actually needs. There are certain people who stay in your mind long after the connection changes, and it can feel almost impossible to explain why. You may go days, weeks, or even months without speaking to them, yet suddenly they appear in your thoughts with surprising intensity. A random moment reminds you of them, and all the emotions connected to that person come rushing back as if no time has passed at all. This happens because emotionally significant connections leave a lasting psychological imprint. When someone deeply affects you, your mind doesn't simply categorize the experience as finished and move on neatly. Human beings are emotionally wired to revisit experiences that felt meaningful, unresolved, confusing, or emotionally intense. A lot of people mistake this emotional residue for destiny. They think, if I can't stop thinking about them, it must mean we're meant to be together. But emotional intensity alone is not proof of permanence. Sometimes it simply means the connection touched something vulnerable, exciting, painful, or unfinished inside you. The mind naturally seeks closure and understanding. When a relationship ends without clarity, when feelings remain unspoken, or when timing prevents a connection from fully developing, the emotional story stays open in your mind. And unfinished emotional stories tend to linger much longer than completed ones. That's why some people become unforgettable. Not necessarily because they were perfect, but because the emotional experience felt incomplete. Your brain keeps returning to the connection, trying to make sense of it, replaying conversations, imagining different outcomes, or searching for answers you never fully received. And often, the other person experiences this too. People carry emotional residue from meaningful connections, even when they appear completely composed on the outside. They may think about things they never said, moments they mishandled, or opportunities they let slip away because fear or confusion got in the way. Emotional memories don't disappear simply because communication stopped. The challenge is learning how to interpret these lingering feelings in a healthy way. Missing someone does not automatically mean you should rebuild the relationship. Thinking about someone constantly does not always mean they are your future. Sometimes it simply means the connection mattered deeply to you. What makes emotional residue powerful is that it keeps a person psychologically present, even in physical absence. Their impact becomes attached to certain emotions, memories, and parts of your identity. That's why moving on from emotionally intense connections often takes longer than people expect. The goal is not to deny the significance of the connection, but to understand that unresolved emotions can create attachment long after reality has changed. Some people remain emotionally present in your heart because the experience itself changed you, not necessarily because they were meant to stay forever. One of the strongest forces that keeps people emotionally distant is not lack of love. It's fear of rejection. When someone truly matters to you, vulnerability suddenly feels dangerous. The stakes become higher because now there's something meaningful to lose. This is why people often behave strangely around connections that matter most to them. Instead of becoming more open, they become more cautious. Instead of expressing feelings clearly, they overthink every message, every interaction, and every possible outcome. A person may think about reaching out to you constantly, but stop themselves at the last moment because fear takes over. They imagine worst-case scenarios in their head. What if they ignore me? What if they've moved on? What if I embarrass myself? What if I care more than they do? So they remain silent, not because the feelings aren't there, but because silence feels emotionally safer than risking rejection. The difficult part is that fear often disguises itself as distance, indifference, or emotional coldness. From the outside, it may look like they don't care enough to make an effort. But internally, they may be fighting an ongoing battle between wanting connection and wanting self-protection. The stronger the emotional attachment becomes, the more intense this inner conflict can feel. Suddenly, every interaction carries emotional weight. A delayed reply feels personal. A small misunderstanding feels threatening. Someone who normally appears confident can become emotionally hesitant because genuine feelings expose insecurities they usually keep hidden, and this creates emotional paralysis. They wait for certainty before taking action, but relationships rarely provide certainty beforehand. Real connection always requires some level of emotional risk. At some point, someone has to be willing to move beyond fear and communicate honestly. Because when two people care about each other, but both remain trapped in self-protection, the relationship slowly becomes controlled by silence, assumptions, and missed opportunities instead of truth. Fear may protect people from temporary rejection, but it also prevents the closeness they secretly want most. At some point, every emotionally confusing connection forces you to ask a difficult question. Is this relationship surviving on feelings alone? Or is it actually capable of becoming something healthy and stable? Because while emotions are powerful, they are not enough by themselves to sustain a meaningful relationship. Many people become trapped trying to decode hidden feelings. They obsess over signs, mixed signals, delayed messages, emotional moments, and the idea that deep down the other person loves them. And maybe that's true. Maybe the feelings are real. But the more important question is whether those feelings are being translated into action, consistency, and emotional effort. Love is not just what someone feels internally. Love is what they are willing to build with you externally. A person may think about you constantly, miss you deeply, and even fear losing you, yet still fail to communicate properly, avoid emotional responsibility, or leave you feeling anxious and uncertain most of the time. And eventually, you have to stop measuring a relationship only by emotional intensity and start measuring it by emotional reliability. Because healthy love creates clarity over time, not endless confusion. This is where many people get stuck. They hold on to potential instead of reality. They become emotionally attached to what the relationship could be if the other person finally healed, became ready, communicated honestly, or stopped running from vulnerability. But relationships cannot survive only on imagined future versions of someone. What matters is who they are consistently showing you they are right now. Real relationships require mutual effort. They require communication during uncomfortable moments, reassurance during uncertainty, accountability after mistakes, and emotional presence even when life becomes difficult. Without these things, love slowly turns into emotional exhaustion. And this doesn't mean someone is a bad person because they cannot give you what you need. Sometimes people genuinely care, but lack the emotional maturity, stability, or readiness necessary to create a secure relationship. Understanding that can help you stop personalizing their limitations, but understanding someone should never come at the cost of abandoning yourself. The healthiest thing you can do is stop chasing hidden emotions and start paying attention to emotional behavior. Who consistently shows up for you? Who makes the effort to maintain connection? Who creates emotional safety instead of emotional confusion? Because in the end, love that stays trapped only in thoughts, fantasies, or unspoken feelings cannot fully grow. Real love eventually moves toward honesty, clarity, and action. And if a connection continually leaves you questioning where you stand, the issue is no longer whether feelings exist. It's whether those feelings are strong enough to create the relationship you truly deserve.